see if I can switch these in my hand. It's like juggling yarn balls. Will it ever work? I don't know. Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 142 in the series. It's getting hard to keep up. Welcome back to the yarn room. It's lovely to have you here. I am testing out some new camera equipment, as you might have gauged from looking at the screen. The other camera that I normally use, which is a Canon, which I love very much, and it was a hand-me-down from Spencer, has kind of died in terms of its light sensor. So suddenly, when I look at this, I can see the room is very much brighter than it was on the old camera. I hope you'll enjoy the change. It's lovely to have you here in the yarn room. It is a beautiful snowy Saturday, actually, and we just had, I don't know, about 6 inches of snow last night, so we took the dogs tromping around in the field this morning, and it's just cold enough to wear all the woolies still in March. So for those of you who are thinking that spring is coming, I'm with you. I hope that it is, but it's not here yet. We have snow and icicles hanging off our fence, and it's definitely like pull on the woolly weather still. So I'll cross my fingers that April maybe will bring us some little crocuses and lovely flowers. In today's episode, I have a finished object for you. This is the Snedronningan sweater by Isabell Kraemer. I also have a shop update and an intro to the next tutorial that I'm putting out about choosing colors for your yoked sweaters. Because for anybody who knows Snedronningan, this is not the Snedronningan that you might see on Ravelry. So I'm excited to talk about choosing different colors for your color yokes in another video. So I usually tell you where you can find me, and I am Knitting the Stash almost everywhere, pretty much everywhere. Here on YouTube, on Ravelry, Instagram. Where else do you find me? Over on the website, knittingthestash.com. That's where all of my online classes are about beginning sweater modification and fun other kinds of sweater modification, cloning sweaters, things like that. And I also have the Flock Farm Yarn shop over there, and I've just restocked a couple of things over there that I absolutely have to tell you about. So if you've been following for a while, you know that the Flock Farm Yarn shop is all about supporting indie shepherds from around the US in particular, and Georgia Rustic Wool. This is Joanne Mackey down in Georgia, and she and I have been working together, I think, pretty much since the shop opened, so over a year and a half now, something like that. Wonderful woman, raising a really cool flock of Gulf Coast native sheep, and in an earlier episode we talked all about Gulf Coast native sheep and how cool they are. They're resistant to a lot of the different kinds of diseases and things that some of the other sheep breeds are more prone to, for example. So they're a really interesting breed of sheep, often raised down south, and she has a beautiful flock of Gulf Coast native from which she gets a lot of fleece and fiber to make beautiful yarn. So we've just restocked the Georgia Rustic Wool 3-ply, which is natural colors, beautiful structure to this yarn. I put out a pattern with the 2-ply for a cowl that I loved working on, and it would come out just as well with the 3-ply. I know people have knit that pattern up in the 3-ply and in a bunch of other yarns. This one's gorgeous, great for sweaters, fully restocked now. And Joanne sent me a brand new yarn. We have one of her alpaca blends in the shop already, but this is a different alpaca blend. This is a 2-ply, 55% Gulf Coast native, 45% alpaca. So you can see that it has some gorgeous sheen to it, some texture. This is a fingering weight yarn. That's the other difference between it and the other alpaca yarn we have in the shop. So this one is about 100 grams for 400 yards, or 4 ounces for 400 yards. So it's a good size skein. You can make some beautiful socks out of this, shawls, hats, mittens, things like that. It is going to have a lot of structure to it because it does have more than 50% wool and 45% alpaca. So it'll have a little bit of drape, but it will have some structure because of that wool percentage that's in this yarn. So one restock and one beautiful new yarn for the Flock Farm Yarn shop. I still have a lot of fleece in the house right now for Shorn 5, and luckily it got kind of warm in December and I was able to skirt everything. I just need to go through and weigh it and decide on the color blends there, because I have some beautiful natural white fleeces. I have some beautiful natural brown and black fleece, and some of that is actually from You and Us, and that's Rhonda McClure. Cool farm out in Nebraska. So I've got a little blend going on for next year's shorn. And shorn is one of the yarns that I feature in the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. It's my own yarn. It's a yarn that I generally tend to know the flock that it comes from, and I do the skirting and I send it off to the mill and design the yarn and all that kind of fun stuff. So we have shorn 4 in the shop right now, and shorn 5 is in the house in fleece form. So hopefully once the weather gets a little better, I will get that all packaged up and mailed off to the mill. Yeah, for next year. Kind of exciting. So let's talk about Snedronningan. This was actually a birthday present from Spencer. No, not the finished sweater itself, not the finished pullover, but the yarn was a gift from him for my last birthday. And it's a yarn that I didn't think I would ever use. And it's a beautiful blend of wool, silk, and camel from Nature's Luxury, which is a yarn company in Germany. So this is why, in part, it's the yarn that Isabell Kraemer used for her sample, and Spencer somehow managed to get a hold of it all the way from Germany. This might have been maybe before all the shipping stuff was going down with the pandemic. It's hard to say. There was some serious supply chain issues going on, but he managed to get this yarn. It's a beautiful yarn. It has so much sheen, so much drape. It's so incredibly soft, and yet it has this really cool structure to it. So I've been actually very impressed. I thought once I washed it, it might just kind of like, you know, slump out and not hold on to its form. But it's been washed and dried, and it actually just, you know, it got a little stretchy when it was wet. But once it dried really nicely, and all the structure and the form is still there, but it fits just perfectly. So I did my measurements, I did my gauge swatch, all that kind of good stuff that you're supposed to do, you know me. And I actually ended up with a gauge that was slightly different from the pattern. So I think I was getting 21 stitches for every 4 inches instead of 20 stitches. So I ended up going up a pattern size in the pattern and doing the math to make sure that I would be good to go, and I was, and it worked out just fine. So that was one of the modifications that I made for this sweater. It is a beautiful top-down sweater. So you do start up here with the neckline. I went with the unfinished neckline option, so she offers a couple different options in this pattern. You can go back and finish the neckline with, I think it's an I-cord or something like that afterward if you want to. I like her sweaters without the neck finishing, and in fact I have the Nasrin sweater here, which many of you have seen. I wear this all the time. I wore it for like a couple of winters straight, and then it needed a little mending, so it's been in the timeout pile for this winter so I could wear some other sweaters. But this is another sweater that's top down, and I didn't add any neck finishing to it. And you can see this one's been around for a couple of years now. It's wearing very well. This is knit up in, oh, I can see the name of the tag, Canadian yarn, single ply, lichen and lace, that's what it is. And it's held up very well. You can see that there's no snags or holes or anything like that in the neckline. So I'm just gonna stick with my plan here and leave the neckline as it is. This sweater I think will end up being stronger than it feels. It feels like it's just this fragile, beautiful thing. But this yarn does, like I said, it has silk in it, camel, and it's been held with mohair, which is half silk and half mohair. So yeah, if you've ever worked with silk or mohair, you know that it has a kind of strength to it. So I really am I think I'm going to be pleasantly surprised about how this sweater wears. Right now I'm a little bit precious about it because it just feels so soft, and it's so, it just feels like it should be fragile, but I think it actually has a pretty good strength to it given the length of fiber staple that you'd find in mohair and silk. That's going to lend a lot of strength to this particular sweater. This sweater is also, it has all the nice details of an Isabell Kraemer sweater. So of course it has the beautiful faux pearl stitch side seam, which I hope you can see there. It runs all the way up the body of the sweater, and then you can continue it up the inside of the sleeve. I only did a few modifications to the actual pattern, aside from knitting up a size, because I really liked the way that this pattern was designed. So the first modification I made was to change the finishing on the cuffs and the hem. So in the original pattern, she calls for a garter stitch hem on the sweater and a garter stitch hem for the cuffs. I don't like garter stitch hems. I've tried them on a few of my sweaters. I find that depending on the yarn, they can kind of sit out like and kind of poof out the bottom of a sweater, which is not always a really like nice look for me, at least. It just feels not so good. Like not a place I want a lot of poof is like down around my midsection. So I tend to avoid the garter finishing on hems. Now that said, I do think that Isabell Kraemer had a good idea for it in this particular sweater, because this yarn really just sits very flat once it's knit. You can see it just kind of hangs and sits very flat. There's not a lot of texture to it. And I noticed that when I added my own ribbing, which I think you can see here, I'm just going to check the camera. It's a 3x1 ribbing. So I really didn't want any tight ribbing. And you can see that if I just set it down, it really just hangs there. It doesn't really do anything. You can hardly even see the ribbing. So I do think that in the case of this particular yarn, a garter hem might have been okay. Maybe, but I wasn't willing to risk it. So I just went with my 3x1 ribbing, and I did that on the cuff as well. I just like the way that this sweater I wanted the whole sweater to kind of invisibly just end. You know, I did change the colors in the yoke. I wanted that to kind of fade out. I wanted the end of the bottom of the sweater to just kind of fade out. And I feel like this particular finishing just does that for me. So I'm pretty happy with that kind of thing. The other thing that I did, because I have the ribbing on here, is that I didn't go with a traditional bind off. I would often bind off in pattern if I have ribbing. So, you know, purl the pearls, knit the knits, and then slip one stitch over the other, just like a traditional bind off. You could do a stretchy bind off, you could do an I-cord bind off, all those things. I tried a bunch of them. And the problem is, as I was saying, this yarn lays so flat and it's so like indistinct that all of those bind offs were just kind of popping wrong. They were sitting on the fabric wrong. They were kind of like turning out and adding an extra element to the ends of the sleeves and the hem that I just didn't like. So I went searching, and I tried and found the Icelandic bind off. It's a very simple bind off where you basically go into the first stitch on your needle and grab, as if to knit, the second stitch, bring it through, hook it, you know, like put your yarn on it, draw a stitch through, and then pop both stitches off your needle. It's interesting. It's a really cool bind off. Look it up on YouTube. There are plenty of tutorials out there. There are a couple different kinds, some in which you pull that stitch all the way through and some in which you don't. I'd recommend pulling it through. But you can see that this kind of finish on this is absolutely perfect. It's exactly what I was hoping for. It just kind of fades to nothing. There's no real like denotation that there's something going on at the bottom of the sweater. There's not like a big thick I-cord. There's not even a thin I-cord. There's no, it's just a beautiful bind off. Now, a lot of people use it, I think, for garter stitch. If I'm remembering right when I was doing I could be wrong here, but I think a lot of people use it in combination with garter stitch because it just also produces a nice fine line around your knitting, and garter is kind of this horizontal, you know, it produces this kind of horizontal effect. So it gives you that horizontal, but I just really love it on here. And this Icelandic bind off is stretchy enough that it doesn't distort my 3x1 rib at all. So this sweater hangs very neatly. Of course, it's also a little bit of the yarn. It's a very drapey yarn, as I said. But because it is a little bit of a stretchy bind off, you have some stretch in your cuffs and your hem, but you get a really beautiful finish. I'm just so happy with the finishing on this sweater. It's one of those, when you finish a sweater, as many of you know, sometimes the finishing can really make or break it. And I feel like this particular sweater, the finishing makes it, and I love it. So yeah, very happy with that. I also did my usual tricks of doing a provisional cast on at the underarm so that I could very easily identify those stitches going into picking up the sleeves and things. And that's in part because I knew there would be this faux side seam stitch that I wanted to make sure continued up into the sleeve without interruption. So a provisional cast on allows you to be a little more picky about that kind of thing. I'm happy with the armpits, as you all know. That's one of my favorite things as well. The other huge modification I made to this sweater is just the color choice for the yoke. So let me grab my yarn and I'm going to show you a little bit of what I did, but there will be another video following this one with a little bit more of an in-depth look of how I made my choices about the colors for this particular yoke in this sweater. So as I mentioned, this was birthday yarn from Spencer, and gorgeous, beautiful birthday yarn. So these were the main color that he chose and the contrast color he chose. Different from Isabell Kraemer's sample that she has up on Ravelry. Hers is a very dark brown and a light, I think it's like an oatmeal kind of color. It might even be this color, but she definitely does a brown for her main color. And then what you do is you hold it double with some mohair. And so Spencer chose these two mohair colors. I'm going to try to hold them up here so you can see. The first one is a dark black kind of mohair color, but it does reflect the light in such a way that it does work very nicely with the blue. And then the other is interesting. This is a very silvery mohair, almost a gray purple lilac. It's got a little purple in it. And holding it double with this is not something that I would have necessarily chosen. I was very skeptical about kind of merging those two yarns together. I was very curious what it would look like. And I'm happy to say they came out very nicely together. So up here, I used that color combination. So you do see the kind of oatmeal, and then the silver mohair kind of shines through, gives a little bit of a halo, and it mutes that oatmeal color just a little bit, which is one of the things I wanted to do with this yoke. I wasn't a huge fan of the bright graphic contrast of the dark background color and then the white or very light contrast color. As you'll hear in the other video, I'll explain it a little bit more, but this was a sweater that I knit a little while ago. It's a beautiful sweater by Sweater Freak. I think it's called My Lopey Pullover, something like that. And I knit this one with the dark background color and then just the single white contrast color. I love this sweater. It's beautiful. I just didn't want this effect for this sweater. So I wanted to do something different that would blend some colors together and create a little bit more of a fade. So to do that, I went into my stash and I found some yarn that was from a fade set that I got from Old Crow Art Yarns a long time ago. And this is the fade. I'll try to hold it up for you. It also had a pink in there, which I just decided to disqualify. It didn't seem like it was gonna work for the sweater. So it has a very light, almost white color down here, very creamy white. Then oatmeal that looks very much like that oatmeal I just showed you, a gray, and then a purple. So this was my fade decision that I wanted to add to the sweater. And I decided not to add it in this order, right now with the purple at the top. I decided to do it like the other way. Let's see if I can switch these in my head. It's like juggling yarn balls. Will it ever work? I don't know. Maybe. Okay, that's a little bit closer. So I decided to do it in this order. So very light at the top, all the way down to purple at the bottom. And that was because, as I mentioned, I really wanted this to kind of like melt and fade out. So you have the brightest contrast at the top, the lightest contrast at the bottom, and that way the purple really blends into the blue a little bit more, and it doesn't give you that stark kind of contrast between the lighter contrast color and the very dark background color. So I'm pretty happy with the way this fade worked out. And like I said, there's another video where I talk all about some of the choices that I made in making that particular fade decision. So things like integrating little bits of the purple all the way along. So I'll try to bring this in here so you can see. So there is some purple up here. There's purple stuck here in the middle of the gray diamonds, and then the final diamonds are just all in purple down here. So the fade that I chose reminded me a lot of some of the other colorwork sweaters that I have that incorporate things like, you know, 3, 4, 5, even 7 colors of yarn, just to give that upper yoke a little bit more depth, a little bit more kind of like eye-catching interest. And I think I achieved that by adding that purple in and then switching from the cream to the gray to the purple all the way down as I went. Couple other modifications for this one. Actually, it's kind of a reverse modification. I normally do a split hem when I do a pullover because I don't like ribbing to kind of sit very tightly on my hips. I've talked all about this on here, and many of you have written in to say you shared my dislike of like the tight ribbing on the bottom of a sweater. So I made a couple different choices. Number one, I knew that this yarn was very drapey and it wasn't going to pinch in or pull in. It was just going to hang very nicely. So that gave me some confidence that it was going to work out. I also did the 3-in-1 ribbing pattern, so it's not really a rib. It doesn't really pull in so much as just provide a kind of border or a kind of like, here, the sweater is ending now kind of an effect. So that also wasn't going to pull anything in. And yeah, I just erred on the side of thinking that this pullover looks like it shouldn't have a split hem to me. You know, it's just one of those style decisions. So I actually didn't modify that, if you can believe it. The other modification I made that's very subtle is in the back here. I wanted to make sure that sometimes when I tend to knit sweaters straight on the sides anymore. I used to do some of that fitted stuff, where you bring in the body or, things like that. I haven't done that in a very long time. I tend to like my sweaters to just hang straight down. That's just my body type. Other people really want or need different kinds of styling. So things like A-lines can be really flattering on a lot of people. And even doing the fitted kind of sweater, like pulling it in on your waist and then flaring it again on your hips, the hourglass kind of look can be really flattering on a lot of folks too. So it's just your body type and what you like and how you like your sweaters to fit, right? For me, I like them to be a little straighter. But I often run into the problem that, sure, my bust size and my hip size are relatively the same. So, going straight, looking straight on, that's fine. But if you look oftentimes at the back of a sweater that's knit without any shaping, you can sometimes get a little bit of there's like a little bit of extra fabric back here. And depending on what you like for ease and what you're going to wear this over and how you style your clothes, all these different things, it's totally up to you. I like to have it come in just a little bit. So in this particular sweater, I did do some shaping, and I think you can barely see it here. 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. It came in just a little bit on the back, kind of creating a V on the lower back. And that way it just pinches off a little tiny bit of fabric. By the time I was done, I think I had taken away about 1 inch of fabric in the back. If you wanted to continue to complete the shaping, you could then add those back in so that your hips would be as wide. For me, I had some sense that this sweater was already going to be draping. I had working a different gauge, working a different size in the pattern. I knew it was going to be okay. So I just took out that excess fabric, just a little bit in the back, and I'm pretty happy with the way that it sits. I also love taking out fabric in the back because it doesn't take the fabric away from your sides or your front. It just does it in that part of your lower back where a lot of us, it's like lower back doesn't really do much. It just kind of sits there and goes in for a lot of people. So that's one of my happy places to like take away a little bit of the fabric if I'm knitting a fairly straight, unshaped sweater. So I did do that with this one. I guess I did modify this a little bit as usual, but I'm very happy with it. I love the finished look of it, and I will put some photos in here so that you can see what it looks like on me and how it kind of hangs and drapes. If you're interested in working with this Nature's Luxury yarn, I would highly recommend it. I think I've got mohair floating around here. I've been like eating mohair as I've done this sweater. I don't know if anybody else has this experience, but like mohair tends to like poof off, like there's the halo, but then there's also the like, I've been eating mohair for a couple weeks knitting this sweater. Anyway, but if anybody else is interested in working with this yarn, it's a wonderful yarn. Has an amazing feel to it. It's not a yarn I would have ever chosen for myself, in part because I feel like it's a luxury yarn, and that's like very special. It was awesome that Spencer got it for me for my birthday, but I don't think I would have knit with it otherwise. So I just want to like put it out there to encourage you, if you're interested in knitting with a quote unquote luxury yarn, something that you feel like you couldn't, it's not about necessarily affording it, but something, you're like cashmere blend or like a silk blend or camel blend or something that you haven't tried that seems a little more luxury. If you can swing it, I totally say go for it, because it really does produce beautiful garments. And this is a sweater that I'm going to wear for many years and love and think about the process. The yarn was wonderful to work with. It just had a wonderful hand feel. And so for those reasons, I'd say if you ever have a chance to do it once in your lifetime, go for it. It can be a kind of really interesting, life-changing experience to knit with a quote-unquote luxury yarn. Not that I will for very many other projects. I think I'm going to be very good about these scraps and maybe make a cute hat or something else to go along with this sweater, because they're really precious and they're beautiful. So yeah. Oh, and some of you might be wondering where I got my fade set. I mentioned it was from Old Crow Art Yarns, Megan Morrell. She's not dyeing yarn anymore, so I have a stash of her yarn that I'm very carefully trying to use in different projects. And this particular fade set, I think, was called French Macaroon or something like that. It was gorgeous. I got it right at the end of when she stopped dyeing, and I found it at the top of my Megan box and decided that it would be a perfect addition here. It is a superwash blend, but because this has so much silk and camel in it, it's not that it behaves like a superwash. but it has some of the qualities of a superwash in terms of luster, in terms of color, in terms of drape, things like that. So the two of them actually combined very well in this yoke, and I think you can see there's not any like puckering or difference between the yarns. I'll actually show you the inside, if I can get this off without knocking over the mannequin. I'll show you the inside here so you can see all of the floats, and that's all just sitting nice and tidy across the back of the sweater on the inside. Oh, look! There's always an end. I thought I had woven in all the ends. There's the mohair. There's one little strand of mohair that I haven't woven in, so I'll have to get back to that. But that's what the inside looks like. Color work. I did end up having to do some 3-color work to make this work, but I love it, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So that's my Snedronningan. I'm gonna eat the mohair again if I pick this up. It's my Snedronningan by Isabell Kraemer with a little bit of a fade for that upper yoke. I've had fun hanging out with you. I hope you've had fun hanging out with me and my new sweater, and I will see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.